Welcome to SILS Connections, and thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Lori Haight. If audience members have a question, feel free to use the chat box and I'll be able to share those. Our guests today are all SILS alumni who are working at the Library of Congress's Congressional Research Service. So I'd like them to start by introducing themselves and then start their presentation. Thank you.
I'm Jennifer Manning. I'm a librarian at CRS in the Government and Finance Division, and I have been there 29 years, and I went to Carolina for both undergrad and library school, and I'll explain more about that and more about CRS in a minute. Who's up next?
I can go next if you like.
Okay.
My name is Anna Groves. I am a Congressional Relations Specialist at CRS. I've been here for just about 3 years. I did my master's at SILS and undergrad at George Mason University. And I graduated SILS technically 2019. Yep.
I can go next. I'm Kathleen Marchsteiner. Like Jennifer, I'm a research librarian in the Government and Finance Division at CRS. I've been here about 2.5 years, just about. I went to SILS. I graduated in 2014. And before that, I got my BA in English from Wake Forest University.
Sundeep Mahendra. I'm on detail in another part of the library right now, but usually when I'm in CRS, I'm a knowledge services librarian. Been with CRS for about 6 years, and left SILS about a decade ago, and had my undergraduate from the university since then.
Is that all of us, I think?
Yeah, that's all of us. Okay,
Great.
so Lori, you want me to start explaining CRS then?
Yes, please. That would be great.
Okay, so I'm screen sharing, so can you see that now?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, so CRS is a little obscure and it's a little complicated, so we wanted to spend a couple of minutes explaining what we are before we talk more about kind of how we got here. We have some slides that we use for orientations for new congressional staff and for visitors. So basically, what is CRS? We are a legislative branch support agency. We are not executive branch employees, although in terms of pay and benefits, we're almost identical. We have a couple of sister legislative branch agencies, including the Congressional Budget Office and the Government Accountability Office. We have about 600 employees. We are located in the Madison building of the Library of Congress. We are a division of the Library of Congress, just like the Copyright Office is. But we only work for Congress. We don't work for the public. We serve as the nation's parliamentary library and research service, while the rest of the Library of Congress serves as our de facto national library. In a lot of countries, these are separate institutions. So if you go to London, there is a British Library, which is separate from the House of Commons Library and the House of Lords Library in Westminster. But in the United States, we are kind of embedded within the National Library. This is our mission statement. Most or all states have an agency that does what we do at the federal level. So there is a North Carolina Legislative Library in Raleigh, and the UNC School of Government also serves the North Carolina legislature. The School of Government kind of does double duty as a public administration school and as an advisory and research service for state and local government. So at CRS, we serve all of Congress. We serve all members, all committees. We are nonpartisan. Our work is strictly confidential. If Senator A asks Kathleen a question, she can't say that Senator B asked her the same question yesterday. And if I am doing research for a member of Congress office and say I have to call a professor or a librarian at UNC for assistance, I can't say who I am working for. We work very hard to be balanced and objective, and we have a whole review office that's dedicated to this. This is our organizational chart. We have divisions of analysts and attorneys arranged by subject specialty over there on the left. Each subject division has a group of librarians within it. So Kathleen and I are in the Government and Finance division. Carla, who wasn't able to be on the call today, is in the Foreign Affairs, Defense and Trade division. Sundeep, when he's not on detail to what we call the big library, is in the Knowledge Services group, which is all information professionals. And Anna is over on the right side of the org chart under Counselor to the Director. And so really quickly about me before I turn it over to my colleagues. Like I said, I went to Carolina for both undergrad and library school. I majored in poli-sci and international studies. I worked in my public library in high school like a lot of other people. Then I worked in Davis Library. Then when I was at SILS, I worked in the School of Government Library. I also had an internship in the library of the Federal Election Commission here in DC, and that's when I first learned about CRS. I came to CRS as a graduate recruit. Someone asked about the Pathways program. We have our kind of own internal Pathways program for new graduates. But we do sometimes hire presidential management fellows through the Pathways program, but we tend to use our own graduate recruit program more often, frankly, because I've heard it's cheaper. So I came into a temporary position right when I graduated, and it was then converted to permanent, and I'm still here. So I specialize in things like congressional office operations, how Congress works. I also cover the demographics of members. I work on legislative procedure. I teach classes to congressional staff, primarily covering things like congressional documents. I also work a lot with our Congress.gov team, managing the Congress.gov legislative database. And I also so I want to give everyone else a chance to talk about themselves. And they're younger, so they're more interesting.
Jennifer, we missed the last thing you said right before passing the baton. Your screen froze up for just a minute there at the end.
Okay. So I also serve as a liaison to our colleagues at other parliamentary libraries. We have
Great.
kind of networks of parliamentary libraries and research services, so we can ask each other questions.
Thank you.
So let me stop sharing my screen. And now you see me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So who wants to go next?
I can go.
Okay.
I guess I'll just do a background of me. Like I said previously, I'm Kathleen Marchsteiner. I'm in the Government and Finance Division here at CRS, and I've been here about 2.5 years. I kind of made my way here through a variety of internships and one federal job. So I started out, I got my bachelor's from Wake Forest University in English with a minor in history. When I was at SILS, I focused on special libraries and had an internship with the Health Science Library as well as the School of Government Library, like Jennifer. Actually work with the same librarian there, which was kind of cool. And then I also have done a few federal internships, one with the U.S. State Department, one with the White House Library, and is that all? I think that's all. And the Library of Congress in the European reading room prior to graduating from SILS. And then after I graduated from SILS, I went on and got a job with the Department of Justice in the executive branch. I was in their internal policy office as a policy librarian, and I conducted research and provided sort of a reference policy side of things at the Justice Department. And then from there came over here to CRS. So I've had a lot of federal experience, but special libraries, I think, are a really neat breed, and you know, I've really enjoyed working in them, and you know, happy to answer any questions you may have on the different kinds of special libraries that are out there, and so yeah, it's been a good path.
I'm happy to go next.
Okay.
So this is Sundeep Mahendra. So I worked in a lot of public libraries before library school, and while I was at SILS, I worked at Davis and at the undergraduate library, and I was an academic library track. And after finishing SILS, I did work at small academic libraries. I applied to a job at Library of Congress, and I saw an ad someone sent me this alert, and it was just for a reference librarian. It was a temporary position. I applied for it, and I was in the knowledge services group at CRS. And that was a short-term job. That, from there, I applied for another position that came open as a digital services librarian. And after that, I applied for another job titled the knowledge services librarian, senior knowledge services librarian, which is to say, it was not a clear path in what getting to where my position is now. It's very interesting that within CRS and within the library, there's so many different opportunities to try completely different jobs with one institution. Primarily what my job at CRS is working on knowledge management, and the way we define it there is as Jennifer talked about, there are so many experts and so much knowledge at CRS, but because everyone is so busy working so hard to answer these questions for Congress, we don't really have the infrastructure to preserve that knowledge. So the team I'm on works on preserving that knowledge as best we can, looking at what tools we have available to us and what processes we can develop. The other cool thing about working for the federal government I didn't realize is that you can do detailed positions. So right now I'm managing the Connecticut Map Museum in the Data Library and the Research Access and Collection Development Department section there. And that's not something I'd expected to do, and again, not something I'd experienced with before, but you get this opportunity to try these temporary positions and try them out. That's all I have.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. I decided to follow Jennifer's example and put on the headphones just to make sure that you can actually hear me. I know it's difficult if the sound quality isn't clear. Just a double check. Is it working okay?
You're very clear, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so as I said in my introduction, my name is Anna Groves. I am a Congressional Relations Specialist with CRS. I graduated from SILS 2019. Did my undergraduate at George Mason University in Fairfax in History and Global Affairs. At SILS, my focus was knowledge management. And so that's been very helpful at CRS. My path to CRS was kind of circuitous, like many of the others. I worked in several public libraries as an undergrad, and then after graduation, I did a series of federal internships with, well, one of them was with the USO, and then I was with National Defense University for almost a year. And I met a CRS analyst who was a guest speaker at NDU, and he invited me to be an intern for him one summer, and that was how I was introduced to CRS. Absolutely loved it. And after that internship, during the summer between first and second year at SILS, came back to CRS to do actually 2 consecutive internships with CRS.
And then after completing coursework with SILS, was hired at CRS into my current position where I've been for almost 3 years. To describe what I do, I would say that the best way to describe it is specialized reference interviews. So pay attention to those classes where they're talking about defining information needs and information seeking behavior and information mediation. That's a lot of what I do, is picking up the phone or reading a written request, basically an email, and trying to understand this information need from the user's perspective, and then turn that into something that one of our analysts or one of our librarians can act on, that they can efficiently respond to that and fulfill that information need. So it's a lot of thinking about what the user is actually asking, because they guarantee you 99% of the time they don't know how to ask what they're really looking for. And it's being able to confidently interact with that user, that customer, even though half the time I have no idea exactly what the topic area that they're asking about is. They're asking about some super specific aspect of healthcare or something that I've literally never heard of before, but that doesn't mean that I can't work with them to define that information need and pass it on to the expert who will be able to answer it. So straightforward things like asking how far back do you want this information to go? What kind of format do you want the response to be in? Are you looking for reading material? How are you going to use this information? Are you writing a speech? Are you responding to a constituent? That sort of thing. And so you learn to be able to define those information needs and understand that information seeking behavior. So pay attention in those classes and be aware of when they talk about gatekeeping and the ethics of that, how important that is. Whether you're working in public libraries or federal libraries, doesn't matter. You end up being in that gatekeeping role, and you have to be aware that you don't want to get in the way and be the one that influences a decision that isn't yours to influence one way or the other. So that's what I've got.
Great, thank you all so much. I love the background of how you ended up where you're at. I think that's always good for students to hear, that there is not necessarily one straight path or one way to do it. So we really appreciate that, in terms of you may not even know going into an internship how much you want to be there. Anna's story kind of alluded to that until she went there, she didn't know how much she would love it. And then I remember working with Anna when she was at SILS, and she was like, I have to get back. And she did. So that's fantastic. Can you talk a little bit about a special library that's a federal library and how that might be different? I think some of it you've alluded to with the confidentiality, but in terms of training or professional development, how that might work?
For one thing, federal libraries definitely have more acronyms, I would say. That's one thing to learn when joining is there may be a lot of jargon, and there may be a lot of, acronyms and that kind of thing, but at least at CRS, people are very willing to help out and to I'm one of a newer employee, and people have been fantastic in assisting you to kind of get used to, this is a legislative branch versus where I came from, the executive branch, and here's how things differ. And in terms of differing from other special libraries, there's the confidentiality issue, of course, and then I think it's like Anna was saying. It's all about information seeking, kind of no matter where you are, and trying to really figure out how you best meet your clients' needs, and how do you they would want to do their job well, and that's our job to help them do their job well. and like how can we best serve them to get them the information they need. And I think while that is unique to us in that we're serving Congress, it definitely applies across the board no matter what special library or maybe library in general that you find yourself in, especially if you're in that research/reference kind of role that we tend to find ourselves in here on the CRS. But that's just me maybe.
I'd say that one thing that distinguishes special libraries from a lot of academic libraries or public libraries is we often are doing a lot more for the client than you would be for a student who comes up to the reference desk at Davis, because usually, you're not writing that student's paper for them. But here, we're not writing your paper, but we're gonna take a lot of information and we're maybe gonna put that in a spreadsheet for you, and we're maybe gonna write a cover memo that kind of explains it, and we're maybe gonna brief you on a call. So we're gonna deliver a lot more than you would to a student. And we also are often going to have to do that under a pretty tight deadline that we might have to negotiate with you. I know Kathleen was just calling a client earlier this afternoon to negotiate a deadline because I'm not sure we can get all that information to you by the end of the day. And Anna also gets to negotiate a lot of that. But
all the time.
But we do a lot more for the client, and it can be under a really tight deadline. It could be like the member is sitting in a hearing and they are waiting for their turn to ask a question and they want to ask us something. Or, they're working on an amendment and they need to turn that amendment in by the end of the day for the markup the next day, things like that. So in some ways that makes us similar to a lot of news organization libraries that also work under really tight deadlines.
The other thing I would mention is that you get used to seeing through the titles. In other words, their title might be legislative director or something else really fancy like counsel 2. You learn to see past that, to see that these are people that are no different than you, that are working in a high pressure situation where they need to not look stupid. That's the main thing. They need your help really badly to not look stupid. And they also, just like if you're working in a public library, they're a little bit nervous if they don't know you real well to come, and basically they're admitting to you that they don't know something, which in this environment is a huge liability. You're supposed to know. You're supposed to be, you're making the laws, so you're kind of the one in charge. You're supposed to know. So if they're coming to you, they're admitting, hey, I have a problem. So you really have to be aware of the language you use and how you interact with them to make that safe space that, hey, it's okay to not know with me, and we're here to get you to where you need to be and protect your confidentiality, and we're here to support you all the way, and you'll be the winner in the end. But you kind of have to be aware that when they come to you, they have that affective experience of, I'm a little nervous to admit that I don't know, because around here you don't do that usually.
That brings up another question in terms of how independently are you working? Is it because of the confidentiality that it's a one-on-one, or are there then other peers in your different offices that you confer with?
We're definitely a team-based environment. I know there's sometimes, it's different every day. We do have our area of specialty or things that we tend to work on, primarily. We also can get questions of gosh, this is a data-driven request and I know I can find the information because I've had the training, but I don't know anything about this topic. Like Anna was saying, it can be things we've never heard of before, and we got to still get the answer to them. And so that's where this huge network in CRS of peers, of librarians and analysts who are kind of like the deep dive experts on topics, that's where we utilize our colleagues, and Jennifer and I were working on a quest earlier today, for example, and they wanted a whole bunch of information due by the end of the day today. And so we work with them to say, well, how's tomorrow? And now we're going to work together to narrow down that information and to get them and package it and send it off. So while the confidentiality definitely exists, and especially when we call outside of CRS, to experts, someone mentioned earlier calling like academics or things like that, the confidentiality certainly is maintained. But typically teamwork is what we do, even in a new virtual environment where we're all teleworking. I'm often on the phone or emailing or trying to talk to people, but it depends. But I'd say that's the current
the other thing that work, like, this kind of fits in with what you're saying, Kathleen, but it's pretty normal to get questions that go across boundaries. In other words, they want to know about healthcare, but in the context of, I don't know, foreign affairs. Mm-hmm. And so we have a division that specifically works on healthcare questions, and we have a division that specifically works on foreign affairs, but it's not uncommon that you get a question that straddles those, one or more of our divisions. And so then people have to work collaboratively.
Right. And we have kind of ad hoc teams that work on things. We have kind of a cross-cutting appropriations team that handles a lot of the appropriations requests. Well, we have these big kind of COVID-19 teams that go across divisions. When we were doing impeachment, we had kind of a team of librarians and attorneys and analysts handling most of those questions. And then a lot of what Sundeep does is working with multiple people to kind of build SharePoint sites and do a lot of digitization and handling records management for analysts who may not know how to do those things.
Building on what everyone was saying, you'll meet people at CRS when you first come on, who are analysts who will say that is the foremost expert on this topic. When you actually go to talk to them, and talk, especially in my context, talking about collecting the materials, you find that they actually have a group of people that they rely on, they work with, so it's a very collaborative environment. Even then, it could seem on certain topics, if there's one person who's the expert, they're still collaborating across the region.
Jennifer, you had, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
No, go ahead.
I didn't say anything.
Jennifer, you had mentioned earlier about, is there a certain type of pathways program for CRS that's different than the PMF?
Okay, I think I just unfroze. So CRS, I think the only pathways program that we do participate in is the Presidential Management Fellows program, but we don't participate in it every year. And even when we do, there's not necessarily a position for a librarian. We more often use kind of our own, what's called CRS Graduate Recruit Program, which is a program for people who are either in graduate school and haven't finished their degree yet, or they've just graduated, and that essentially you're hired for 3 months. That may be extended to another month, and then if they like you and there's a position open, they might then convert you to permanent. And those are listed on USA Jobs, just like other jobs. So even though we're legislative branch, we do post jobs on the USA Jobs.
I did want to throw something in there. That was something I made a note to remember to mention. If you've never done a USA Jobs application before, welcome to hell. I saw a meme yesterday that just hit me right in the feels, and it said that therapy should be available to everyone that ever has to do a USA Jobs application. A USA Jobs application is different than, if you've never done a federal application, it's different than normal job applications. and there is a different strategy involved for success. And I'm happy to provide mentoring on that topic. I've done it before. I have a whole PowerPoint on this. So just a heads up that you will have to use USA Jobs to get a federal position, and you will have to fill out a lot of applications to get one interview anywhere. So just be prepared that it is not a straightforward process and there is a learning curve to it. So just throwing that out there.
Anna, that was literally my next question, because I wanted someone on this panel to say, how important is it to have a federal resume versus a regular resume? And you're saying it's very important.
Yeah, and not just the resume, but being prepared to answer the KSAs. I forget what that acronym actually stands for.
Knowledge, skills, and abilities, I think.
That's it. And every organization is going to format those slightly differently. And yeah, just be prepared for writing a lot of stuff.
Give yourself a lot of time. Don't take advice from just one person. Some folks will tell you, write everything you've ever done in your entire life in every single essay question.
Pay attention to the deadlines.
Yeah, pay attention to lots of time and actually answer the question, because it'll be hard to figure out what the question's actually asking.
Use those keywords. My top recommendation is you've got to get past the bots.
All about the keywords.
Because
yeah,
it's all about the keywords, because you're weeded out literally by robots in the beginning, and they're just doing word matching. And so, especially in those KSAs where they say, do you know how to use a left-handed monkey wrench on Wednesdays? Your immediate first sentence should be, I use left-handed monkey wrenches on Wednesdays. I literally copy paste that sentence and then turn it into a statement and then add my actual personalized responses. But you gotta get those keywords in there, or a human being will never ever see you. So that's number one.
Make sure you elaborate on those keywords, because the human does have to read that after it gets past that.
Yeah, exactly.
And the federal hiring process is slow.
Very
so
slow.
Apply early. Don't, even though you're graduating like months from now, that does not mean it is too early to apply for a federal job, because it is slow.
You're actually kind of behind.
Yeah. CRS, like other agencies, we do occasionally hire temporary people, and we need to get them on board quickly, often because we're coming up against a fiscal year, and so we need to have someone now before that money runs out. Occasionally, we do not post that on USA Jobs. Sometimes that is just on the CRS Jobs page.
What I did when I was applying, I set up an alert I was looking on USA Jobs, but I also was looking at CRS specifically, and I set up an alert on the CRS job page, and I just got the alerts, and I still haven't turned it off, and I still get the alerts from that page. And so I definitely, if you are interested in CRS in particular, I recommend you can set up those alerts on CRS on that job posting website.
And I would say, don't be afraid of temporary jobs. I mean, there's 4 of us on our call, and it was going to be 5 with Carla. But Sundeep, me, Anna, and Carla all had temporary jobs at CRS that turned into permanent. So that's 4 out of 5. We like to hire people that we know.
It's a good track record to have, right? I was wondering, before 2020, how much of your work was virtual, and has that changed? And do you think new hires in the future will be more virtual, or not necessarily?
No idea. We went
We
went from 0 to 100 at this point. So
we had people. I guess we had people who were allowed to telework once a week. So a few of our tech people did it twice a week. We were doing very little online training. Most of our training was still in person. Congressional staff like that. So this was a big change for us. We weren't allowed to telework, most of us, more than once a week. And there have been a lot of security concerns for us.
We've actually brought on a few new hires during this pandemic as well. So that's been interesting getting to know them, honestly, entirely virtually, because no one is in the office right now. And it's kind of indeterminate as to when we will be going back. And so it's definitely been an interesting process meeting people virtually. But that's where things like this help. You know, you got the video conference and phone calls, pull people in on requests, things like that. But yeah, like others said, we went from 1 day a week maybe to all days.
Although I guess like Sundeep and you and your team, you and your folks, there are some kind of printed materials that you're trying to manage and digitize that we can't do that right now, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a problem throughout all of the libraries. There's some workarounds where some people allow people on site for a couple hours to grab some material, or in the next phases when we start coming back on site, there might be a couple people who can come on and digitize things quickly and actually catalog the material off site. Yeah, but it's all new, it's all Wild West.
I also had a question about, I know it's, the roles are non-political, but what type of cycle do you go through with when Congress is in session or when there's an election coming up? Does that, you mentioned how you can be very much under a tight deadline. People are sitting there waiting for your responses, but how does maybe the calendar year change based on what's happening with your users?
We're right in there with them, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
We're keeping track of which days are in session and which ones aren't. And sort of like the tide goes in and out with that. You get more calls on in-session days. Caveat, leading up to in-session days especially. Or days with big hearings.
Yeah. We can be pretty slow in August recess. We can be slow in December if Congress is not in a lame duck session, but we are also busy as we get ready to change a Congress because we have all these new staff and members coming in that need to be trained. We're busier with anytime we have a presidential administration change. We can be busy as we're kind of trying to finish up appropriations bills before going out of session, which is happening right now. So, I mean, we are kind of do go with the congressional ebb and flow, but we don't really change our work hours for that.
When they're in recess too and in their home states in non-pandemic times, you know, we also run into a lot of constituent questions often. You know, sometimes members will be home and they'll get a question and they'll be like, well, I don't know how to answer this. Let me ask my staff, and then the staff will ask us. And then, you know, we don't answer constituent questions directly, but we assist staff in answering constituent questions. So sometimes there'll be an uptick when people are back in their home state, or during an election year. Same deal if questions come up. But
Yeah.
Or if something major happens in the headlines, like a pandemic.
or impeachment. Or a natural disaster or something like that, you know, then that's a huge thing that Congress has to deal with. They have to have legislation and hearings, but there may also be a lot of constituents that need help. And so we've had an enormous amount of constituents who are asking their congressional offices for help with getting, you know, getting loans and grants and help me get my unemployment insurance and things like that.
And on that note, one thing to think about is that even if you don't end up at CRS as your first place, and you end up maybe with a different federal agency, it isn't necessarily a bad thing, because one of the things that we do is helping congressional staff understand information coming out of other federal agencies and understanding the data they're putting out or getting information from those agencies. And so if you have some experience or expertise in a particular agency, that could actually be a plus for you.
I know when.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Kathleen.
I was saying, having come from the executive branch over to the legislative branch, that I think, you know, it's interesting to see how everything works differently. But we do have, at CRS, we work so closely with the agencies that, like Anna said, I think it is useful to have, any kind of federal knowledge if possible. But even if you don't have that and you want to end up at CRS later, as long as you focus on that customer service aspect and maybe your research skills too.
I know when we were talking in the spring about putting this panel together, several panelists mentioned how much this is seen as like the Cadillac of librarianship. And so the idea that you all seem very excited and motivated to be working where you're working, if maybe you could give us your top 2 or 3 things that you enjoy most. Not necessarily comparative to other places, but just why you love working for CRS.
I could jump in, although I've been in CRS for 6 months, but I do, even tough to say sometimes with what's going on in the news, but it's, I do believe in the mission. I think just the formed legislative body really does, like a functioning democracy. I don't think that's in this conversation. I find that very inspiring. It's a nice thing to focus on every day. The fact that you're working on a very obscure constituent request. And like we were talking about before, I really like the people atmosphere. Everyone is really quick to help each other, and I think it's a great place to work.
I would agree with Sundeep. The mission is really a big part of it, but also just the variety and the challenge that you might on any given day deal with anything from pandemic to appropriations, and kind of just the crunchy wonkiness of it, just the nerdiness of how do you track down that random hearing record from 1963 that only one person in the entire world still cares about. I don't know, it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I agree with Sundeep. I mean, I love the mission. I love working for an institution that's one of the oldest democratic institutions on the planet and have this, 240 years of tradition. I still kind of get excited when I walk across Capitol Hill after all this time. It's fun to see the crowds before the Supreme Court, before a ruling. It's fun to see senators. I kind of miss all that. I majored in poli-sci, and so it's fun that I kind of actually get to use my poli-sci degree all the time, but without having to be a politician and without, kind of being an at-will employee of a politician. I still have a job if my member, I don't have to worry about my member not getting reelected. So it's kind of nice to be in on the edge of all the politics of Capitol Hill, but not like really mired in it.
You get the best of both worlds, where you can really be down in the weeds of the policy but not have to take an advocative position, which, depending on who you're working for, which you may or may not personally agree with.
And you rarely have senators yelling at you at 9 o'clock in the evening, unlike young congressional staffers.
Yeah, I love that every day is different. Like, that's probably my favorite part of the job, that I can walk in and on my way to work, I'll be on the bus and I'll see a headline come across and I'll be like, oh, that's something Jennifer's working on today. Or like, oh, that's something that might come across our desk. And I think it's so cool to kind of be on that cutting edge of the news and to learn something new almost every day. I mean, like I said, we all work on our own topics, but I still definitely get stuff that I'm like, I never knew that. Like, that is so cool. Now I know something new. And whether that's from my own research or from conversations with my analyst and librarian colleagues, or, whatever it may be. And then I know Jennifer mentioned earlier how a lot of our work is, we're not writing like, an undergraduate's paper, but we're crafting and creating these products so that these staffers can present the information to their boss and say, here we go, what do we want to do with this? And I really love that crafting process and the thinking about how do I phrase this in a way that best, presents my methodology, and are there any caveats that I might have forgotten? Like, what's a way to present this information that will help the client in the best way that I can, and give them the information they need in that nonpartisan way. And I just really, maybe I was an English major, but I really enjoy that writing process as well. So it's been great.
I'm going to pause for a minute because I've been asking all the questions. I want to see if our audience, I haven't seen any type up in chat. So I'll stop talking for 10 seconds and see if anyone has a question.
Can I throw something out there while you're doing that?
Sure.
I wanted to mention that if it's helpful to anyone, the Law Library of Congress has trainings on congress.gov available to the public through their website. So if you're interested in that, and that's something you want to put on your resume, that might be helpful. And you can access all of that through their website, which I believe is law.gov. So they lucked out with that URL, but they have a lot of great resources available publicly on their website, so it's worth exploring.
Great.
No questions?
Oh. So we do have someone that recently graduated from SILS and looking for a position, preferably at the federal level. Any interviewing tips you might want to give us today? We heard about the federal resume, and I totally agree with all of those points, and that's certainly something that I've helped people with, but there's lots of resources. Anna volunteered herself today too. But how about for interviewing?
So the interview questions they're going to ask are going to be the KSAs.
Also, don't be surprised. Federal interviews are very strict for the most, especially the executive branch. Legislative branch can be a little looser, I think, but they have to ask everyone the exact same questions, and the interviewees can't give away like any emotion, at least like in the executive.
It's kind of awkward. It's kind of an awkward experience.
And you're answering the question, and you're like, did I do it right? Like you're looking for like encouragement or maybe any kind of.
And they're just sitting there like.
Yeah, and they're literally just like, cool, thanks. Okay, next question. Blah 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 blah. So
yeah, we get training in that, and it is stiff and awkward, and I guess it's designed to be as objective as possible because everyone's getting asked the same questions. But don't be put off that it's stiff and awkward because it's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say exactly. Like it's okay if it's awkward.
Yeah, listen to the questions, answer the questions, but don't respond.
Questions do you have? Have good questions.
Yeah, don't respond in time with the same awkwardness that we perform behind panels.
We also had another question in chat about if one or more of the panelists could describe a typical day, especially given the tight deadlines discussed earlier. Kathleen maybe mentioned there is no such thing as a typical day, but I guess how your day flows.
Sure, yeah. So, I'll come in and we typically have what's called a queue, which is our own requests kind of lined up for us. And we kind of work through those. And for me, it's about time management, right? And trying to see like, okay, I have my 8.5 hours of the day and I have these meetings and, how long do I think it'll take to get these things done? And sometimes I don't know how long it'll take. And that's where, like what Jennifer and I were talking about, where negotiations may come in, and it may be, and maybe as you're working on a project, all of a sudden one comes in, it's due in an hour. So it kind of throws you off your game. And you have to be like, okay, well, I got to reprioritize here. Like I need to move this over. And put this aside because there's no deadline and go to this deadline-driven one, and who do I need to talk to and what do I need to find out? And if you do need to go, if you can't get them what they need necessarily in its all-encompassing scope, that's where you say, like, you give them a call and you say, hey, here's what I can get you by this deadline, and is that okay? And here's what I can get you at a later date, and we kind of work with them to make sure you can help them best you can. But so it kind of ebbs and flows, and on the days that I don't have anything really coming in, that's where I work on what are called CRS reports and longer term projects, and go from there. And I'm sure all of us have different styles, but that's kind of how I navigate my days anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing. Most of us don't work at a reference desk. We do have kind of one reading room where a few librarians work, but most of us don't have like any reference desk duties. So we're kind of in our own office the whole time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but Kathleen says, you might be working really hard on something or think you're going to spend all afternoon updating that CRS report because events have happened, but you might have to just drop everything because you've got something suddenly that's due in half an hour.
I guess my day is the one that's significantly different because I'm not working as a research librarian. I'm not working at a actual reference desk, but it's still kind of a reference role. So it's really responding to each customer as they arrive, whether it's on the phone or through our website, and working through that process of responding to their request and moving it on. And we have a whole process that we do in our office to follow that, and to do it in a timely manner and capture all the necessary information. And we'll be taking in those requests throughout the day as they arrive. We trade, how would I say that? Each of us takes a week where we are responsible for processing all of the web requests that come in that week. If you're on call for that week, then you're going to be especially busy because the vast majority of our requests are arriving through the web. And it's surprisingly mentally exhausting to process the requests like that, to read closely and understand exactly what they're asking and decide, do I think this should go to one of our health analysts or one of our legal analysts, and try to make those decisions back to back to back throughout the day. And then I will sometimes have projects where, for example, we do our CRS services briefing. So our office is responsible to give basically a CRS orientation to new congressional staff. So we rotate on and off that duty. And then I also have some special projects, for example, working on an internal website for special event that CRS hosts for new congresses. So different projects like that I'll be working on when the phone isn't ringing.
I think for me, like everyone said, it could be working on a large project and be working on a collective collection of material from one particular team or one particular individual, and not just for days or weeks or months, but that could easily be interrupted. I understand my day doing that, and I still have some time that I spend on the reference desk with people staff or taking reference requests, and that might get reference that day. So just varies maybe that.
Yes, and our audience responded that they appreciated you saying how exhausting so much decision making can be in the day-to-day of what your jobs are, and acknowledging those priorities and how you time management to get those things done.
Definitely take a break also. I no matter what job you find yourself in, and especially in these new times, I often just go take a walk, at lunch and get the sun, and that can help.
Yep. Don't feel guilty about taking your break and recharging.
Definitely.
Another tip I would throw out there is one of the big challenges about working in DC is just the fact that you're in DC and you have to figure out cost of living and commuting, and it's just a reality. And so if it's a goal to work for a federal agency in DC, have a realistic plan for how you're going to manage that process, because your first year or two, especially if you're temporary, that's going to be one of your biggest obstacles, is figuring out how you're going to manage rent and cost of commuting. The library does offer a reimbursement program for if you're taking metro or buses.
Or trains.
So that's, yeah, so that's helpful. But just keep in mind that this is not, it's sort of like if you decide you want to work in New York City, you've got to be realistic about how you're going to manage the practical realities of life.
Prepare yourself for a long commute.
Yeah, yes.
That is something funny. Here in North Carolina, I have a very long commute and I say, well, I grew up in the DC area. This is good for DC. And they're like, you don't live in DC anymore. And I'm like, but it just wears on you that I'm like, this is pretty good. So I appreciate that part also in terms of the whole package of not only the position, but the environment. Well, if there's no other questions today, I wanted to make sure I got an opportunity to thank our panelists. Thank you very much for taking on this new initiative. We're very excited to have this recording for people who have more questions in the future. Is it okay if students want your contact information for me to be able to share your emails?
Sure, of course, yeah.
Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you very much. And to our participants, you'll be getting an evaluation from me shortly. And not only will we want to hear how you enjoyed this presentation, but more ideas for the future so that we can continue to bring alumni connections to our SILS students and recent graduates. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.